Sarah Martinez had always been different from other soldiers in her unit. While her fellow medics focused solely on treating wounded soldiers, she spent her free time studying helicopter manuals and flight operations. Her colleagues thought it was just a hobby, something to pass the long hours at the forward operating base in Afghanistan. They had no idea that Sarah had grown up around aircraft, her father being a retired Apache pilot who had taught her the basics of rotary wing flight before she even learned to drive a car. The base where Sarah was stationed sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills, a strategic location that provided both advantages and vulnerabilities. Enemy forces had been increasingly active in the region, launching coordinated attacks on supply convoys and patrol units. The terrain made it difficult for ground forces to respond quickly to threats, which is why the base relied heavily on its small fleet of Apache helicopters for air support and reconnaissance missions. Sarah's medical training had been exemplary. She could perform emergency surgery under fire, stabilize critical patients in impossible conditions, and had saved more lives than anyone could count. Her commanding officers praised her dedication and skill, but they saw her only as a medic. During briefings about helicopter operations, she would listen intently, absorbing every detail about flight patterns, weapon systems, and tactical maneuvers. Other soldiers assumed she was just being thorough about potential medical evacuations. The truth was more complex. Sarah had applied for flight training multiple times, but the military's bureaucracy and gender barriers had repeatedly blocked her path. Her medical expertise was too valuable, they said. The unit needed her skills on the ground, not in the air. She had accepted this reality but never stopped learning, never stopped preparing for an opportunity that might never come. On the morning that would change everything, intelligence reports indicated unusual enemy movement in the surrounding hills. Radio chatter suggested a large-scale attack was being planned, but the exact timing and target remained unclear. The base's Apache pilots were running continuous patrols, their aircraft loaded with Hellfire missiles and ready for immediate response. Sarah went about her normal duties, checking medical supplies and preparing the field hospital for potential casualties. The base commander, Colonel Harrison, was a veteran officer who had seen multiple deployments. He trusted his pilots completely but worried about the increasing sophistication of enemy tactics. Recent attacks had shown better coordination and more advanced weaponry than previous encounters. The enemy seemed to be learning from each engagement, adapting their strategies to counter American air superiority. This concerned Harrison more than he let on to his subordinates. As Sarah worked in the medical tent, she could hear the distinctive sound of Apache rotors in the distance. 2 helicopters were conducting a routine patrol of the perimeter, their pilots maintaining constant radio contact with the base's Tactical Operations Center. The sound had become so familiar that most soldiers barely noticed it anymore, but Sarah always paid attention. She could distinguish between different helicopter types by sound alone and often knew which specific aircraft was flying based on subtle variations in engine noise. The first sign of trouble came at 13:47 hours when one of the patrol helicopters reported movement in Sector 7, approximately 3 kilometers northeast of the base. The pilot observed what appeared to be vehicles moving through a dried riverbed, using the natural terrain to mask their approach. Standard protocol required confirmation before engaging, so the Apache moved closer to get a better visual identification of the targets. Sarah was treating a soldier with a minor burn injury when the radio crackled with urgent communications from the patrol helicopter. The pilot's voice was calm but tense as he reported multiple enemy vehicles, including what appeared to be anti-aircraft weapons mounted on pickup trucks. The situation was escalating rapidly, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she listened to the unfolding tactical situation. Within minutes, the second Apache was redirected to support the first, and ground units were placed on high alert. The base's defensive systems were activated, and all non-essential personnel were ordered to take cover. Sarah secured her medical station and prepared for incoming wounded, but part of her mind was focused on the radio chatter describing the aerial engagement that was about to begin. The enemy had chosen their timing well. It was the middle of the day when most aircraft operations were routine, and the attacking force was larger than anything the base had encountered in recent months. Intelligence estimates suggested at least 12 vehicles in the enemy convoy, with unknown numbers of personnel and sophisticated weaponry. The two Apache helicopters would be facing significant odds, even with their advanced targeting systems and experienced crews. Sarah checked her medical supplies one final time and positioned herself near the landing pad where wounded soldiers would be brought in. She had no way of knowing that within the next few hours, she would be fighting not from the ground but from the cockpit of an Apache helicopter, using skills she had never been officially allowed to demonstrate. The enemy convoy was moving steadily toward the base, and the battle that would define her military career was about to begin. The first Apache helicopter engaged the enemy convoy at maximum range, its pilot launching Hellfire missiles at the lead vehicles with practiced precision. The explosions echoed across the valley as two pickup trucks erupted in flames, their mounted weapons destroyed before they could pose a serious threat. However, the enemy had anticipated air resistance and quickly dispersed their remaining vehicles across the rocky terrain, making targeting more difficult for the circling helicopters. Captain Jake Morrison, piloting the lead Apache, reported successful hits but noted the enemy's tactical sophistication. They were using smoke screens and coordinated movement patterns that suggested military training, rather than typical insurgent operations. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Davis, worked the targeting systems while monitoring for anti-aircraft threats. The second Apache, flown by Captain Torres and Lieutenant Kim, positioned itself to cut off potential escape routes. Sarah watched from the medical station as smoke plumes rose from the distant hills. The radio communications revealed a complex battle developing rapidly. The enemy convoy had split into smaller groups, with some vehicles moving toward high ground while others attempted to flank the helicopter's position. Anti-aircraft fire began erupting from multiple locations, forcing both Apaches to take evasive maneuvers and temporarily break off their attacks. The tactical situation deteriorated when Captain Torres reported mechanical problems with his Apache's main rotor system. Vibrations in the aircraft suggested potential bearing failure, a critical issue that could lead to catastrophic failure if not addressed immediately. Protocol required immediate return to base for emergency maintenance, but this would leave Captain Morrison's aircraft facing the entire enemy force alone. Colonel Harrison made the difficult decision to recall both helicopters to the base. The risk of losing an Apache to mechanical failure or enemy fire was too great, especially when ground reinforcements were still hours away. The enemy convoy would have to be engaged by other means until additional air support could arrive from neighboring bases. Sarah listened to the recall order with growing concern, knowing that the base's defensive perimeter would soon be tested by a determined enemy force. As the damaged Apache approached the landing pad, Sarah could see fluid leaking from the aircraft's transmission system. Captain Torres managed a controlled landing, but it was clear the helicopter would be grounded for extensive repairs. The maintenance crew immediately began assessing the damage while the flight crew reported to the Tactical Operations Center for debriefing. The second Apache landed moments later, its pilot reporting limited ammunition remaining after the initial engagement. Captain Morrison estimated they had destroyed or damaged 4 enemy vehicles, but at least 8 remained operational and were continuing their advance toward the base. The enemy's anti-aircraft capabilities had proven more formidable than intelligence reports had, suggested Sarah was helping. Evacuate the crews from their aircraft. When the first mortar rounds began falling on the base perimeter, the enemy had moved close enough to bring the facility under indirect fire, forcing all personnel to take cover in reinforced shelters. The Tactical Operations Center maintained communications with higher headquarters, requesting immediate air support and artillery assistance, but the nearest available aircraft were still 40 minutes away. During the bombardment, Sarah noticed Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, the base's senior Apache maintenance specialist, working frantically on the damaged helicopter. Despite the incoming fire, he was attempting to assess whether the aircraft could be returned to service quickly. His preliminary diagnosis was not encouraging. The transmission would need major repairs that could take several hours under ideal conditions. The situation became more desperate when ground scouts reported enemy infantry moving through the rocks toward the base's eastern perimeter. The mortar fire was providing cover for a coordinated ground assault that could overwhelm the base's limited defensive forces. Colonel Harrison ordered all available personnel to defensive positions while continuing to coordinate with higher headquarters for support. Sarah found herself torn between her medical duties and her growing awareness that the base's survival might depend on getting at least one Apache back into the air. She approached Chief Martinez during a brief lull in the bombardment and offered to assist with the helicopter repairs. Her knowledge of aircraft systems, gained through years of self-study, might prove valuable in diagnosing the mechanical problems. Martinez was initially skeptical, but quickly realized that Sarah's understanding of hydraulic and electrical systems exceeded that of most soldiers. Together, they determined that the transmission damage was localized to the oil cooling system, which could potentially be bypassed temporarily using emergency procedures. The aircraft would be operating at reduced capability, but it might remain airworthy long enough to engage the enemy force. The critical question was who would fly the partially repaired Apache. Captain Torres was experiencing symptoms of possible concussion from the hard landing, and Captain Morrison was needed to coordinate with the incoming air support. The base's other qualified pilots were either injured or unavailable, leaving a dangerous gap in operational capability. As enemy small arms fire began impacting the base perimeter, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of the battle. She had never flown an Apache in combat, but she understood the aircraft systems better than anyone else currently available. The enemy was preparing for a final assault, and the base's survival might depend on immediate air support from their one, partially operational helicopter. Colonel Harrison faced an impossible choice: risk losing his only functional Apache with an untested pilot or allow the base to be overrun by enemy forces. Time was running out, and the enemy was moving closer with each passing minute. The fate of everyone on the base would soon rest in the hands of a field medic who had dreamed of flying combat missions, but had never been given the opportunity to prove herself in the air. Colonel Harrison stared at Sarah Martinez as she explained her plan to take the damaged Apache into combat. The idea seemed impossible. A field medic with no official flight training piloting a multi-million-dollar attack helicopter against a sophisticated enemy force. Yet as enemy mortar rounds continued falling around the base and small arms fire intensified from the perimeter, Harrison realized he had few alternatives. Sarah's confidence surprised everyone present. She had spent countless hours studying Apache flight manuals, memorizing emergency procedures, and understanding weapon systems that most ground personnel never even saw. Her father's early training had given her fundamental flight skills, and her medical background meant she could handle high-pressure situations better than most soldiers. She was asking for a chance to prove that years of preparation had made her capable of this mission. Chief Martinez supported Sarah's proposal, knowing that her technical knowledge of the aircraft exceeded that of many officially qualified pilots. The repairs he had completed were temporary at best, requiring a pilot who understood the specific limitations and could compensate for reduced hydraulic pressure and modified control responses. Sarah had helped with the repairs and understood exactly what the aircraft could and could not do in its current condition. Captain Morrison volunteered to serve as co-pilot and weapons operator, recognizing that Sarah would need an experienced crew member to handle the complex targeting systems while she focused on flying the damaged aircraft. His presence would also provide credibility to the mission and help coordinate with ground forces who might question orders from an unknown pilot. The decision had to be made quickly. Enemy forces were now within 500 meters of the base perimeter, and defensive positions were taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Intelligence reports indicated that the enemy was preparing for a coordinated assault that could breach the facility's defenses within the next 30 minutes. Air support from neighboring bases was still 20 minutes away, too late to prevent the base from being overrun. Colonel Harrison authorized the emergency flight mission, understanding that it violated numerous regulations but represented the base's best chance for survival. Sarah and Captain Morrison rushed to the Apache while Chief Martinez completed final system checks. The helicopter's engines were already running, and all weapon systems had been loaded with maximum ammunition loads. Climbing into the pilot's seat felt surreal for Sarah. She had imagined this moment thousands of times, but never under such desperate circumstances. The familiar layout of controls and instruments gave her confidence, while Captain Morrison quickly verified that all systems were functioning within acceptable parameters. Radio communications with the Tactical Operations Center confirmed that enemy forces were massing for their final assault. The takeoff was smooth, despite the aircraft's mechanical limitations. Sarah felt the Apache respond to her control inputs exactly as she had expected from her studies and simulations. The damaged transmission created some vibration, but the aircraft remained stable and controllable. Captain Morrison monitored engine parameters while preparing the weapon systems for immediate engagement. Flying low over the base perimeter, Sarah could see the tactical situation clearly for the first time. Enemy vehicles were positioned in a rough semicircle around the eastern and northern approaches, with infantry units moving through cover toward defensive positions. Muzzle flashes from small arms fire created a deadly pattern across the landscape, while mortar teams continued their bombardment from concealed positions in the hills. The first target was obvious, a pickup truck with a mounted heavy machine gun that was providing covering fire for advancing infantry. Sarah maneuvered the Apache to attack from an unexpected angle, while Captain Morrison locked onto the target with the helicopter's chain gun. The engagement was brief and decisive, with the enemy vehicle destroyed in a burst of 30mm cannon fire. Enemy forces immediately began targeting the Apache with small arms and anti-aircraft weapons, forcing Sarah to use evasive maneuvers she had only practiced in theory. The helicopter's agility surprised her, as she dove and climbed through the rocky terrain, using natural cover to avoid enemy fire, while positioning for additional attacks. Captain Morrison coordinated their movements with ground forces, ensuring that friendly troops were clear of engagement zones. The second target was more challenging, a mortar team positioned in a narrow canyon that provided natural protection from air attack. Sarah had to approach from a steep angle while maintaining enough distance to avoid small arms fire from supporting infantry. The attack required precise timing and coordination between pilot and weapons operator, skills that typically took months of training to develop. Captain Morrison guided Sarah through the complex engagement, his experience compensating for her lack of combat flying time. Together, they eliminated the mortar position with a single Hellfire missile, creating a massive explosion that echoed across the valley. The destruction of the mortar team immediately reduced pressure on the base's defensive perimeter, allowing ground forces to reposition and strengthen their lines. Enemy commanders quickly recognized the threat posed by the Apache and began coordinating their anti-aircraft efforts. Multiple vehicles converged on open areas where they could bring concentrated fire to bear on the helicopter, forcing Sarah to constantly change position and altitude. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex, with threats emerging from multiple directions simultaneously. As Sarah maneuvered through the hostile airspace, she realized that her medical training was actually helping her performance as a pilot. The ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, make quick decisions with limited information, and coordinate multiple tasks simultaneously were skills that transferred directly to combat flying. Her years of saving lives in impossible situations had prepared her for this moment better than traditional flight training might have done. The enemy's next move caught everyone by surprise. They began using coordinated smoke screens to mask their vehicle movements, making targeting extremely difficult for the Apache crew. Sarah found herself flying through a maze of smoke plumes, while enemy forces repositioned for what appeared to be a final, desperate assault on the base. The battle was entering its most critical phase, and her ability to locate and destroy the remaining enemy vehicles would determine whether the base could hold out until reinforcements arrived. The smoke screens created an eerie battlefield where Sarah had to rely on thermal imaging and radar systems to track enemy movements. Captain Morrison worked frantically with the Apache's sensors, trying to identify targets through the artificial fog that obscured much of the terrain. Enemy vehicles were using the cover to reposition closer to the base, their heat signatures appearing and disappearing as they moved between rocky outcroppings. Sarah discovered that her medical experience with reading diagnostic equipment translated perfectly to interpreting the Apache's complex sensor displays. She could quickly identify patterns in the thermal imaging that indicated vehicle types and movement directions, skills that normally took pilots months to develop. This unexpected advantage allowed her to anticipate enemy movements and position the helicopter for optimal attack angles. The first breakthrough came when Sarah spotted 3 vehicles moving in formation through a dried riverbed, using the natural depression to approach the base's weakest defensive sector. The enemy commander was clearly experienced, choosing routes that maximized cover while minimizing exposure to air attack. Sarah realized she would need to use the helicopter's agility to attack from an unexpected direction. Diving low between two hills, Sarah approached the riverbed from the west, while Captain Morrison prepared a coordinated attack using both the chain gun and remaining Hellfire missiles. The maneuver required split-second timing, as the helicopter would be exposed to anti-aircraft fire from multiple directions during the attack run. Sarah felt her heart racing as she committed to the dangerous approach. The attack was devastatingly effective. Captain Morrison's first missile struck the lead vehicle, a pickup truck carrying what appeared to be anti-tank weapons. The explosion created a chain reaction that damaged the second vehicle, while the chain gun eliminated the third before it could escape the kill zone. 3 more enemy vehicles had been neutralized, but Sarah could see additional threats moving through the smoke. Enemy return fire was immediate and intense. Tracer rounds streaked past the Apache's cockpit as Sarah pulled into a climbing turn, using the helicopter's power to escape the concentrated ground fire. The damaged transmission began showing warning indicators under the stress of combat maneuvering, but the aircraft continued responding to her control inputs. Chief Martinez's repairs were holding, but Sarah knew she was pushing the helicopter near its operational limits. Captain Morrison reported multiple new contacts on the thermal sensors. At least 6 vehicles were converging on the base from different directions simultaneously. The enemy was executing a coordinated final assault, timing their movements to overwhelm the defensive perimeter before air reinforcements could arrive. Sarah realized that stopping this attack would require aggressive tactics that exceeded normal safety margins. The next target was the most dangerous yet, a group of vehicles approaching the base's main gate where defensive fire was lightest. Sarah could see enemy infantry preparing to dismount from trucks while supporting vehicles provided covering fire. The attack had to be stopped immediately, but approaching the target area would expose the Apache to concentrated anti-aircraft fire from multiple positions. Sarah made a decision that surprised even Captain Morrison. Instead of the usual standoff attack, she flew directly toward the enemy formation at high speed and low altitude. The maneuver violated standard tactics, but created the element of surprise that allowed Captain Morrison to engage multiple targets before enemy gunners could respond effectively. 2 vehicles were destroyed in quick succession, forcing the infantry assault to halt. The aggressive attack had consequences. Enemy forces now concentrated their anti-aircraft efforts on the Apache, creating a deadly crossfire that Sarah had to navigate while continuing to engage targets. Bullets struck the helicopter's armor repeatedly, and warning lights began appearing on the instrument panel. The aircraft was taking damage, but Sarah pushed forward with the mission. Captain Morrison coordinated with ground forces to identify the highest priority targets among the remaining enemy vehicles. Intelligence reports indicated that destroying the enemy command vehicle would disrupt their coordination and potentially cause the entire assault to collapse. The challenge was locating the command post among the remaining vehicles while avoiding the increasingly effective anti-aircraft fire. The breakthrough came when Sarah noticed unusual radio antenna configurations on one of the vehicles moving through a narrow canyon. Her technical knowledge allowed her to recognize sophisticated communication equipment that indicated a command function. The target was heavily protected and positioned in terrain that made attack extremely difficult, but eliminating it could end the entire battle. Sarah began planning an attack run that would require flying through the canyon at extremely low altitude, exposing the Apache to small arms fire from both sides while approaching the target. Captain Morrison expressed concerns about the plan's safety, but admitted that conventional attacks had little chance of success against such a well-protected target. The engine warning systems began showing increased temperatures as the damaged transmission struggled under combat stress. Sarah realized that the helicopter might not remain airworthy much longer, making this potentially her last opportunity to strike a decisive blow against the enemy force. Time was running out for both the Apache and the base's defenders. As Sarah prepared for what could be the mission's final attack run, she reflected on the incredible circumstances that had brought her to this moment. A few hours earlier, she had been treating minor injuries in the medical tent. Now she was piloting a damaged attack helicopter in the most important battle of her military career, with the lives of everyone on the base depending on her ability to locate and destroy the remaining enemy vehicles. The radio crackled with updates from the Tactical Operations Center. Reinforcing aircraft were still 10 minutes away, but enemy ground assault teams were beginning their final approach to the defensive perimeter. Sarah would have to complete her mission in the next few minutes, or the base would be overrun regardless of air support. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but her confidence in the Apache's capabilities and her own skills remained strong. Sarah committed to the dangerous canyon attack run, dropping the Apache to just 50 feet above the rocky floor while accelerating toward the suspected command vehicle. The narrow walls on both sides erupted with muzzle flashes as enemy infantry opened fire from concealed positions, their bullets creating a deadly corridor that the helicopter had to traverse to reach its target. Captain Morrison worked the defensive systems while calling out threats, his voice calm despite the intensity of enemy fire striking the Apache's armored hull. The helicopter's chain gun swept the canyon walls, suppressing some of the ground fire while Sarah maintained precise control despite the challenging flight conditions. Flying at high speed through such confined terrain required skills that even experienced combat pilots rarely developed. The command vehicle came into view around a bend in the canyon, its distinctive antenna array confirming its importance to enemy operations. Sarah could see personnel scrambling around sophisticated radio equipment, while security forces positioned anti-aircraft weapons to defend their critical asset. The target was heavily protected, but its destruction would cripple enemy coordination across the entire battlefield. Captain Morrison locked onto the command vehicle with their last Hellfire missile, but the shot required perfect timing as they emerged from the canyon into a wider area where enemy forces could concentrate their fire. Sarah held the Apache steady despite increasing engine vibrations, giving her weapons operator the stable platform needed for an accurate engagement. The missile launch was flawless, with the Hellfire striking the command vehicle directly and creating a massive explosion that destroyed not only the target, but also adjacent ammunition storage. Secondary explosions continued for several minutes, eliminating the enemy's communication hub and several supporting vehicles. The tactical impact was immediate, as radio intercepts showed confusion and loss of coordination among remaining enemy units. However, the Apache's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The transmission warning lights had progressed from caution to critical, and Sarah could feel increasing vibration through the flight controls. Chief Martinez's emergency repairs were failing under combat stress, and the helicopter would soon become unflyable. She had minutes at most to complete the mission before mechanical failure forced an emergency landing. The remaining enemy vehicles were now scattered and disorganized, but several still posed significant threats to the base's defensive perimeter. Sarah spotted 2 pickup trucks with mounted weapons attempting to establish firing positions on high ground, overlooking the facility. Eliminating these threats would require using the Apache's chain gun at maximum range, pushing both the aircraft and crew to their operational limits. Sarah maneuvered the struggling helicopter into attack position, while Captain Morrison engaged the first pickup truck with sustained cannon fire. The 30mm rounds found their target, destroying the vehicle and its crew in a burst of flame and smoke. The second truck immediately began evasive maneuvers, but Sarah anticipated its movement and positioned the Apache for Captain Morrison's follow-up attack. The engagement was successful, but the effort proved too much for the damaged transmission system. Warning alarms filled the cockpit as critical components began failing, and Sarah felt the flight controls becoming increasingly unresponsive. The Apache was dying beneath her, its damaged systems finally succumbing to the stress of extended combat operations. Sarah managed to maintain control long enough to move the helicopter away from enemy positions, but a forced landing was now inevitable. She selected a relatively clear area near the base perimeter, where ground forces could provide protection, while she attempted to bring the Apache down safely. The landing would be rough, but the alternative was catastrophic mechanical failure in flight. Captain Morrison prepared for emergency landing procedures while coordinating with ground forces to secure the landing zone. Enemy infantry was still active in the area, but the destruction of their command structure had significantly reduced their effectiveness. The Apache's mission was essentially complete. Even though the aircraft would be lost to mechanical failure, the emergency landing was harder than Sarah had hoped, but she managed to keep the helicopter upright and prevent injury to the crew. The Apache's engines shut down automatically as multiple systems failed simultaneously, leaving the aircraft a total loss, but having successfully completed its impossible mission. Both crew members evacuated quickly as ground forces moved to secure the crashed helicopter. From the landing site, Sarah could see smoke rising from multiple destroyed enemy vehicles scattered across the battlefield. Intelligence reports confirmed that at least 12 enemy vehicles had been eliminated, with the remainder retreating in disorder after losing their command and control capabilities. The base's defensive perimeter had held, and reinforcing aircraft were now arriving to finish mopping up scattered enemy forces. Colonel Harrison arrived at the crash site within minutes, his expression showing a mixture of relief and amazement at what Sarah had accomplished. The impossible mission had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, with a field medic flying a damaged attack helicopter to victory against overwhelming odds. The enemy assault had been completely defeated, and the base was secure. Sarah stood beside the wrecked Apache, still hardly believing what had happened. In less than 2 hours, she had gone from treating minor injuries to piloting one of the most sophisticated military aircraft ever built in actual combat. Her years of study and preparation had finally paid off in the most dramatic way possible, proving that determination and knowledge could overcome official barriers and bureaucratic limitations. The aftermath of the battle would bring recognition, investigations, and ultimately changes to military policies regarding pilot qualification and emergency procedures. But for now, Sarah was simply a soldier who had done her duty under impossible circumstances, using skills that nobody knew she possessed to save the lives of everyone around her. The field medic had become a combat pilot when her unit needed her most, and she had not let them down. The weeks following the battle brought a whirlwind of investigations, debriefings, and media attention that Sarah had never anticipated. Military investigators arrived to examine every aspect of the emergency mission, questioning how a field medic with no official flight training had successfully piloted an Apache helicopter in combat. Colonel Harrison faced scrutiny for authorizing such an unprecedented deviation from standard procedures, but the mission's success made criticism difficult to sustain. Captain Morrison provided crucial testimony, supporting Sarah's actions and competence during the flight. His detailed reports described her technical knowledge, decision-making under pressure, and natural flying ability that had made the mission possible. The weapons operator's credibility as an experienced Apache crew member gave weight to his assessment that Sarah had performed at the level of a seasoned combat pilot. Chief Martinez explained the technical aspects of the helicopter's emergency repairs and why Sarah's assistance had been essential to getting the aircraft airworthy. Her understanding of hydraulic systems and electrical components had exceeded that of many officially trained technicians, proving that her years of self-study had created genuine expertise despite the lack of formal certification. The investigation revealed that Sarah's father had provided extensive flight training during her youth, including time in civilian helicopters and detailed instruction in rotary wing aerodynamics. This background, combined with her intensive study of military aircraft systems, had created an unusual but effective foundation for her emergency piloting duties. Military regulations had prevented her from pursuing official flight training, but they had not prevented her from acquiring the knowledge needed to succeed. Media coverage of the story created national attention and sparked debates about military policies regarding women in combat roles and alternative pathways to pilot certification. Sarah found herself reluctantly thrust into the spotlight as an example of capabilities that had been overlooked by traditional military structures. She preferred to focus on her medical duties rather than publicity, but recognized that her story might help other soldiers facing similar barriers. The most significant outcome was a comprehensive review of emergency procedures and cross-training policies throughout the military. Sarah's success demonstrated that valuable skills might exist among personnel whose official roles did not reflect their full capabilities. New programs were established to identify and develop hidden talents that could prove crucial during emergency situations. Sarah received multiple decorations for her actions during the battle, including the Distinguished Flying Cross despite her lack of official pilot status. The recognition was meaningful, but she valued more highly the lives that had been saved through her emergency intervention. The base's defenders had all returned home safely, and the enemy assault had been completely defeated. 6 months after the battle, Sarah received official acceptance into the Army's helicopter pilot training program. The usual requirements were waived based on her demonstrated competence and the recommendation of multiple superior officers. Her medical background would make her particularly valuable as a pilot capable of conducting medical evacuation missions in hostile territory, flight School proved easier than expected for someone who had already flown combat missions in an Apache. Sarah's instructors were amazed by her technical knowledge and natural flying ability, though they insisted on teaching proper procedures that she had improvised during her emergency mission. Her classmates knew her story and treated her with a mixture of awe and respect that made the training environment somewhat surreal. The damaged Apache was eventually repaired and returned to service, but not before serving as a case study for emergency procedures and battlefield maintenance techniques. Chief Martinez's repairs had been analyzed and incorporated into official training materials for helicopter mechanics. The aircraft's survival of the emergency mission had validated both his technical skills and Sarah's flying ability. Sarah graduated at the top of her pilot training class and was assigned to a medical evacuation unit where her combined skills as both medic and pilot proved invaluable. She could assess patient conditions while flying evacuation missions, providing medical care during transport, and making tactical decisions that optimized both flight safety and patient outcomes. Her unique background created capabilities that traditional training programs could not replicate. Years later, Sarah reflected on the chain of events that had transformed her military career in a single afternoon. The battle had been won not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the determination of individuals who refused to accept limitations imposed by circumstances or regulations. Her story became part of military folklore, inspiring other soldiers to pursue their goals despite bureaucratic obstacles. The enemy assault on the forward operating base had been intended to demonstrate that American air superiority could be challenged through coordinated ground attacks. Instead, it had proven that individual initiative and unconventional solutions could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Sarah's emergency flight mission had not only saved the base, but it also revealed capabilities within the military that standard procedures had never recognized. The field medic who had dreamed of flying combat missions had finally gotten her chance under the most dramatic circumstances possible. She had not just succeeded, but had excelled, destroying 12 enemy vehicles and saving countless lives through her courage and skill. Her story proved that sometimes the most important qualifications for extraordinary missions are determination, preparation, and the willingness to take action when others believe success is impossible.